This is Sweeten Life Systems sponsoring Relational Peace University. One of our main goals is to help people who are challenged with pain in their lives, in their childhood or their adulthood, things like divorce, to find peace. Today, we have with us Dan Cox and Paulette Warner. Welcome to Relational Peace University. So good to have you. How did you, Paulette, get involved in Divorce and Beyond ministry in the seminars that you're presently a speaker in?
Well, thanks, Gary. So I'm from the Caribbean. You're going to hear an accent. And both me and my ex came to the U.S. for school. We went to Houston, got married, and then Procter & Gamble brought us here to Cincinnati. We were here for about 15 years, 15, almost 20 years, when my marriage beginning to go what you may refer to as south.
Yeah.
Some of the things that were happening were we were having lots of conflicting and fightings, and then there was some infidelity and abuse of the children. The abuse of the children is really what
the final straw
was the final straw in me deciding to divorce. So.
How many children did you have?
So I have 2 adult children now, a boy and a girl.
And they were, of course, children?
They were much smaller. They were less than adolescents when we started talking about, what's happening with our marriage. So we tried counseling. That didn't work. We, for a bit there, we were part of the children's services because there was, like I said, abuse that was involved. Some things happened that I didn't even know of. We both were part of a church. Yeah, we both taught Sunday school and were very involved in church. And I think part of our upbringing, if you know anything about the Caribbean, is to be very disciplined. And so my ex would hit the way of disciplining the kids is what brought the issues. And so, the daycare and also with schools, whenever a child shows up and they have a mouth that's bleeding or whatever, they are supposed to ask. That's what they do.
So you had to take the children to children's services, and that impetus was, and what was going on with the kids was primarily the thing that led you to want to end the relationship.
It was certainly the last straw. I'm like, this is enough. The counseling didn't work. They gave new ways of disciplining, and that didn't work.
Sure.
And I came home from work. I was doing part-time at the time, and my son's nose was bleeding.
Okay.
And that was like, no.
That was it. That was it. Okay, and so we'll get to hear the rest of the story then, how you got involved with the ministry. But let's hear a little bit from Dan. Your story a lot different from that or similar?
It's some similarities. I several years ago, I'm twice divorced. And after my first divorce, which we were married, we were high school sweethearts, and it didn't last very long. And I was able to chalk that up to just being too young. And then after that divorce, I wound up a few years later becoming a Christian. So my whole life just flipped on its head, and things were great. And I met a lady that went to the same church I was attending. And in fact, the pastor of that church introduced us, said, I think you guys would be great together. And she was a musician, and I had this Christian band. She ultimately wound up joining that band, and we did all kinds of musical ministry things together, youth rallies and things like that. And at the end of about 4 years, we quit doing the music ministry, but still very involved in the church we attended. In fact, when she left me, I was leading a men's group. And I was just devastated, and I just believe I'm the oldest in my family, and I take care of things.
Did you have children too?
Through my first marriage, I had one son.
One son already.
Right.
So you brought that into the second marriage.
Exactly. And they got along great.
Mm-hmm.
He adored her. She seemed to adore him. I did everything I could to try to prevent the divorce.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I saw that
Wasn't going to work.
it wasn't going to work.
So in some ways, this is a story that's often the case. Many people are in the church, they're Christians, they're born again, they're involved in ministry. You both were involved in ministry, but that alone wasn't enough to save your ministry, your marriage. And no doubt each of you wanted to keep that. Nobody goes into marriage and say, I take thee to be my first wife, first husband, you know. We want to stick that out till death does part.
Absolutely.
So your good intentions and what you learned in church wasn't quite enough. You needed something else. So how did you get involved, or at least introduced to the Divorce and Beyond ministry? It was after you were divorced, I assume.
Yes. After I was divorced, I lived pretty close to the VCC, Vineyard Cincinnati, and I was going to a church down in Walnut Hills at the time. Mm-hmm. And I somehow saw a sign or was invited, I can't remember exactly how, but I saw the seminar coming up. Mm-hmm. And being single and not having community, I thought, I'll go and check it out. And so I went and checked it out and went through the seminar and the follow-up groups, 13 weeks.
How long had you been married at that time and divorced?
So I was married, by the time my divorce was final, I was married for 25 years.
25 years.
Mm-hmm.
So then you were single and still pretty lonely and looking for some community.
Yes. And anything that would help, because I was beginning to have doubts. See, when I grew up in the Caribbean and in my church, I considered, or I was taught, divorce was a sin, the big sin.
Absolutely.
And so I waited forever. I mean, my ex was told to leave the house. But we were still married, and I still considered ourselves still married, although he wasn't in the house. So that for that period of time, and so by the time we were totally married, it was divorced. It was about 25 years.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. So would you say that because the early teachings in your faith back in the Caribbean or wherever, you had a lot of guilt and shame because of this?
I felt I walked around with a big D. And that's one of the big things that led me to finding the seminar, the Divorce and Beyond seminar. Because to give you an example of how shameful I felt, in the Caribbean, we're more communal. So, when you think you've done things right, people tend to look up to you, both family, friends, and particularly church friends. Right. They point to, why can't you be something more like Paulette and blah, blah, blah. And so it was so embarrassing for me to go through a divorce. After I had filed, it wasn't about 3 to 5 months before I could even bring myself to tell my parents.
So in some ways, you stayed in your community with good report as long as you kind of fit all of the rules.
Yes.
But if you didn't, maybe they didn't put you out, but you had that sense you were no longer acceptable to that community.
Yes, yeah. And you've fallen off of the man-made pedestal so much.
Yeah. And so did you think when you heard about Divorce and Beyond that there might be some help for that?
Oh, I read I'm a lifelong learner, so I read a little bit about what it was and what I could expect to get out of it, and decided to go. But that was good, but even showing up, I stood outside because, the vineyard at the time was very homogeneous, so to speak. And so I'm like, is there anybody going to be looking like me? So I stayed outside and, just see who was going in. Okay. And somehow I got the gumption to go in. which I'm
Isn't that
grateful for.
amazing? Because again, you're wanting to fit into that community, and
Correct.
if we don't fit in all together on all the little check marks and boxes, you have that sense that I don't belong. I can't.
Correct.
And that's
Correct.
what shame is, really.
Yes, yes.
That's
yes.
shame. Well, Dan, what about you? Yes, you went through two divorces, both extremely disappointing, I'm sure, especially the second one because you were in ministry together. You thought, hey, this is a marriage made in heaven.
God brought us together.
Oh, yeah. God brought you together, of course. And
Right.
so, what were your emotions and your thoughts at that point in time?
Huge amount of guilt and shame. I really felt like I had let God down. I think I had a very toxic view of what being a Christian was.
Yeah.
And I actually, to myself, I didn't say this out loud, but I always thought, as long as I take care of God's business, He'll take care of my marriage,
Okay. Yeah.
which is ridiculous.
Like a quid pro quo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, in my neighborhood, everybody loved Dan. I was always helping him. But later on, thinking back, I realized that my poor ex-wife was sitting home alone thinking she wished she had this Dan guy too, you know. So anyway, she announced one night that she wasn't happy. A couple days later, she left and never to return. I was attending the vineyard as well at that time, and I was doing sound. And I don't remember who or how, but anyway, well, she left in March. We were divorced in July.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
So that
Pretty
September,
quick.
yeah, that September, I'd found out about the seminar.
Oh, that very year.
Yeah. And even though I was attending the vineyard and knew it was not a shame-based or guilt-based
Yeah.
kind of church, I was literally scared to death. I felt so bad that, badly about letting God down, that I thought if somebody up front says, shame on you in any remote way, I'm out of here because I couldn't handle it. So,
Well, you weren't, in some ways, you had the same kind of thoughts and feelings that Paulette did without being black and a woman and from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So she had all those kind of marks you'd think about. You didn't have that.
well, I did have how many short, fat, bald guys are going to And there were plenty.
There were plenty of
There were plenty. So
You weren't the only one.
I was not the only one.
So you had these thoughts running through your head, and you're checking things, kind of like Paulette was. I want to make sure that I'll really fit and I'll be accepted.
Exactly.
And then when the seminar starts, people get up there and start talking. You're super sensitive about what? What were you super sensitive about when they said? What would Dan just said if they said something about you're guilty or you're ashamed, he would be out.
I don't know what they could have said that would have caused that, but I do know what was communicated either verbally or just, I don't know.
Non-verbally rejected, not paying attention.
What I heard is you are just like everybody else in this room. You're not alone, and what you are experiencing, this huge amount of pain, is absolutely normal. And that was just, I get goosebumps now thinking back. It was like this huge sigh of, okay, no one's going to remind me how rotten I was. No one's going to remind me I let God down. No one's going to scream, God hates divorce, and which he does, and I know why now, because I hate divorce.
Right.
But he doesn't hate divorced people.
That's a key thing. It's almost what comes to me is Jesus at the Samaritan woman at the well for the first time. She thought, well, you won't even drink of this water because I'm no good. You judge me,
or even talk to her,
or you talk to her, and he did. So he broke down that barrier that was in them deep within both the Jews and the Samaritans. So none of that happened when you walked in.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was set up where it was announced that everyone who I would come in contact with was divorced.
Okay.
And then that enabled me to all these people, regardless of who they are, have gone through the experience that I have gone through.
Well, now the Vineyard is pretty much a middle-class white church.
Correct.
You're middle class or upper middle class, but you ain't white.
Correct.
With all of the color sensitivity today, was that a barrier for you going into this group?
No, it was at first when I stood outside just to see if I would, could assimilate or would be anyone would even understand remotely where I was coming from. But once I got inside, and I think my experience at Procter and Gamble too enabled me, because I worked around a lot of Caucasians and people from all over the world. So being African American was somewhat of more people don't understand my story. Are they going to say, yeah, but because you started it, I was the one who filed, so you started it. Are they going to understand that story?
Each of you has been involved in presenting. So you're part of the reason that people come in and they want to know, are these folks like me? Can I identify here? And then what part do you present in this? Seminars all day long, twice a year, in person, and then it's online on Relational Peace University, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's where we're trying to let you know about that. So what do you present in that seminar?
Well, I'm the MC, so I'm the first person up. And I tell my story, of course, but I understand that the sooner a group of people laugh, the sooner they relax. So it's my job to purposely be funny. It's easier to be funny just goofing around, but I have to do it on purpose. So that's my role. I do announcements. I sing some songs I wrote about divorce that are humorous.
I see you with a guitar all the time, still strumming.
Right. I wrote a song. It's called "Right Now I'm So Miserable It's Almost Like You're Here," and it just goes back to my time of being divorced. And I do want to add one thing I think is very important. Paulette said that she initiated her divorce, and when I look back on my marriage, I could say, well, my wife left me.
Right.
What was I to do?
Right. You were the victim,
I'm the victim. And that's really, I've met so many people over the years that they initiated their divorce, but they were really forced into doing so. And although my wife did what she did, if I honestly look back on it, I forced her. I wasn't communicating the way I should, etc. So whether someone initiated the divorce or they feel like they're the victim, there's no, you don't get an award if you're the one that was left behind.
Yeah, well, that's really good. And in some ways, I think you implied, I've heard you speak before, you neglected, because you were so busy doing a lot of other things, helping everybody else in the community, working at the church, doing the Lord's work.
Exactly.
And not taking care of things at home.
So for me, I am part of the speaking series. So I, along with Bill Coons, I do the crisis cycle, which is just speaks to when you first get a divorce, how your emotions go all over the place and pendulum flings
kind of
back
like the
and
grief
forth.
cycle, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, yes. Exactly, it goes down and how you get to. I also do the identity, self-image and identity. And then also how enable them to get to the new lifestyle. So it's that grief, that whole cycle. Bill and I do those.
Really like their stages of change, aren't there?
Correct.
I mean, it's almost their stages for almost everything, how you get sick and how you get well.
Yes.
So you sort of go over those, how the grief, the pain, the denial, anger, and stuff like that happens, and then how you can get out of that. And because you've been involved in it, it's slapped you in the face.
Oh, yes.
You know it.
Oh, yes. And it's my biggest challenge for folks who are going through or who come to the seminar are two things: to find hope and community. Because that's where I was. I was like, there has to be a better way. And I was beginning to feel, the loneliness, everything that comes in. And the seminar propelled me for growth and healing in those areas.
So that hopelessness is that dread and maybe sadness. It's hard to get up out of that, isn't it?
Correct. Because it was never in my cards. Like I said earlier, I thought I had done everything right.
Yeah.
I was a Christian at 12. I taught Sunday school.
Yeah.
I mean, my family, was in a tight-knit God relationship. And Dan spoke earlier about disappointing God.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly was.
Wow.
I never wanted to be statistics. Never wanted my kids to be living in a single-family home, particularly here in America. I mean, because you've heard of all the statistics, you see all the things on TV, what happens to single parents. But I have a boy and a girl, particularly
Right.
a male child.
Yes.
And so that was extremely heavy on me.
Yeah.
So the seminar...
So you were anxious about the future and them, as
Very
well as
correct.
the guilt of,
Oh, my
could I
goodness.
save this marriage
Yes.
and that kind of thing?
Oh, yes, very much so. Because my whole life, I wanted an intact family where my children would not be considered statistical.
Yeah. But it sounds like this, you've told me what your goal is, to have community. You want
Yes.
the people to be able to have that sense of community and welcome there with you. And hope coming out of
Yes,
this.
yes.
Hope that things can be better. They can be better.
Yes.
They can find relationship
Correct.
and so forth. Right?
Correct.
What about you, Dan? What would you say is your major goal, other than relaxing people and playing great songs?
Well, I do at seminar. I talk a little bit about the layers, and actually I'm writing that chapter in the book. And we use the word, and this is how I think we give people hope. We use the word divorce to describe this one event, which it is.
Yeah, it is.
But there's several little divorces. There's a financial divorce. There's an
Okay.
emotional divorce. You divorce from your ex's family sometimes.
Yeah.
Friends. There's just all kinds of
Right.
mini divorces. And if we can look at that, we use an onion. If we can look at those individually,
Oh, okay.
and we can say, okay, well, I can do this about the financial part right now.
Yeah.
Got this list. Maybe I can get that checked off. Or maybe one of the things I need to have all this stuff you have to do. Maybe I need to change my beneficiaries at work. We can do that. And as you check these things off your list, so to speak,
Wow.
it begins to feel like it gives you a little more control back. And I think just knowing that the people up front, including Bill, and this is what happened, or the way I felt, here's a guy up here leading the seminar for this big church, and he's divorced. So it must be, not that it's okay, but
Yeah.
obviously there's redemption, and the feeling that gives you hope.
Right.
And for me, I act a little bit silly. It's like, if that crazy guy can get through this, maybe I can too. And I think that's the big thing, is that hope, and that all these people around you that are helping are divorced.
Right.
And this divorce can be broken up into several little things that maybe I can start dealing with some of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because divorce, when my wife left me, I just lost in being the eldest, and the job I had and all that. I was in control. I was the one that kept things. She took all the control away from me.
Ooh, like
Every
that.
bit of it, like that. And I also felt like I presented this image of this really together guy,
Yeah.
strong Christian believer.
Right.
I'm in the middle of leading this men's group at my church at the time, and all that is stripped away. This guy's wife just left him.
Right.
And the things, the self-talk is this horrible. What's everybody thinking?
Yeah, you can't deny it.
No, it's like, are they thinking, well, no wonder she left him. I know this guy. And fortunately, the men's group, the first time we met after she left, the following week, we always started by telling people how our week was. And I would usually start, and then, but this time I started by letting Joe start, and it went around in a circle. And I was afraid I would just lose it.
Yeah, of course.
So we finished the circle, and I start in on the material, and somebody said, wait, Dan, how was your week? And I took a breath, and I started talking. And I don't remember sobbing so uncontrollably in my life. I think part of it was trying to control it, and I couldn't.
Sure.
And this group of men, and this had never happened to me in life, gathered around me and put their arms around me. And I can't imagine, or I couldn't have imagined before that that I could allow this group of men to see me like this. I
Right.
felt naked, but also that their hugs and their caring felt so great, and they just prayed for me.
Wow. Tremendous.
And we're here for it. And the rest of the night was spent on Dan.
Yeah. Which you needed.
I needed
Yeah.
desperately.
So you had a loving church in the first place, a loving group in the church.
That's a great point Dan brought out at the seminar. There's one of the big things that we do too is give folks the opportunity, if they so desire, to commune with someone and pray for them. Because you come in, you don't know what to expect, your emotions are all over. And so that's another big aspect
Big,
of the seminar.
big. Yeah, I think wish every church had James 5 services where you gather and pray for people.
There's one more, I think, important thing to mention. This isn't true for all men. Nothing's true for everyone. But as men, we struggle, or I know I did, with being naked, so to speak, in front of other men.
Vulnerable.
Vulnerable. And we tend to kind of shy away from anything that'll, get us there. I was doing a singles event one time, and I was playing my guitar around this campfire. It's getting cold. I was getting cold. And I observed, as I looked around this humongous circle, all these ladies were huddled together with blankets, underneath their blankets. All the guys were sitting back with the proper amount of space between each and every one of them, legs spread apart. And I know they were freezing because I was freezing. And it just occurred to me, it's like, wow, we can't. And I had no desire to cuddle up with a bunch of men under a blanket.
No.
But I thought, we're missing something.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
Well, that's the power of having gone through this horrible life stage, situation. We are now able to have empathy for the folks who come to the seminar.
Yes.
And that is one of the huge things that why I continue to do the seminar, is the empathy that the folks feel in the room is beyond male, female. It's an empathy that these folks have gone through this. And maybe they know just a little bit of something that I could glean from and use that day, that night. As a matter of fact, some of the things we said is, when you go home tonight, do A, B, C, just to see what happens.
Right.
And it's just so instrumental.
Yeah, I've told Bill that after being at the seminar a couple of times, that we used to have a thing we call breaking free, which people would bring their whole lives and the pain to, that maybe from childhood, that they never had prayer for. They've been ashamed of their whole lives. And we'll pray for that and bring it out. And in some ways, this is divorce and beyond. But the folks who come to that are filled with so much guilt and false guilt and shame and false shame and self-condemnation and all that. And it's a place for prayer and love and hugs. And I like to say, hugs, not drugs. It's easy to turn to a drug. It's easy to turn to sex. It's easy to turn to alcohol, cigarettes, other kinds of marijuana, etc. But hugs are better.
Yes.
Hugs drive out drugs. And so what you're talking about is a psychological hug, a spiritual hug, and sometimes even a physical hug.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. Really appreciate this. I think the people tuning into this and watching will see the power of coming together in divorce and beyond, and making sure you grab hold of that beyond, and seeing what God can do when you're vulnerable and when you lay it out there and gather with a group of like-minded people who are pursuing hope and healing and mercy and grace together. So may the Lord bless and keep you, and make his face to shine upon you, and make sure you tune in and bring your people with you, your family and your friends, to watch this webinar and go to the all-day seminar and watch it online. So Christ be with you until we meet again.